You're clearly enthusiastic and determined, just as you were this morning for the opening speeches from Lord Hastings and from Carlton, Dr. Carlton Brown, the guy who has put this together with his team, and from Wilfred Emmanuel Jones. We've had some great sessions. And what are we building toward? Well, our final speaker, our final keynote, is the CEO and founding member of Impact X Capital Partners, the host of Channel 4's The Moneymaker. How many of you saw The Moneymaker? I certainly did and loved it. Yeah. And he's grinning away there. He's an author of a new book to be published in September this year called We Don't Need Permission, Unlocking Black Empowerment for Good. He calls him London-based here, but I can tell you on good authority, because I heard it from the horse's mouth himself a moment or two ago, Eric Collins, serial entrepreneur, is now a UK citizen. He's one of us. Just a word or two about him before we see a little kind of highlights reel of his best bits. Spent much of his career building the value of digital companies, innovative strategies at public and private companies, including AOL, Time Warner, Mobile Posse, SwiftKey, Microsoft, and most recently Touch Surgery, where he was COO. And interestingly, from our point of view, 4 years ago he was part, and I saw this reported in the news, with great fanfare, part of a prominent group of Black European and US serial entrepreneurs, including institutional investors, investment bankers, corporate leaders, and entertainers, to found Impact X Capital Partners. Have you heard of Impact X? So a double bottom line venture capital firm that invests in underrepresented innovators in Europe. Fantastic. And Eric, I'm just going back to his history now. Degrees from Princeton University and Harvard Law School. Whoa. My God, advisor in the technology space, so much more, and I'm sure he'll tell you a bit more. And former President Obama appointed him to the Small Business Administration's Council on Underserved Communities and as an evaluator for White House fellow applicants. So that's the big sell. Before we meet him right here live on stage, let's see him in 2 dimensions on celluloid. Ron VT, please.
What we should be talking about is we should say BAME is one category. Let's have a conversation there of a mixed group, but then we need to have specific conversations with the various individual sort of groups that then make up that designation, because Black businesses are having a tough time or in critical care. And that needs to be thought about specifically. What are the solutions for those businesses? So you have got to survive this period, then design what your business needs to do in order to be able to thrive in this new world.
Please meet him yourself. Eric Collins, come on, you can do better than that. Eric Collins! Eric Collins! Bro, how are you? Fantastic.
Good afternoon, everybody. That is amazing. And you all, if you haven't had the opportunity, or if no one's ever done this, you should sort of sit while someone introduces you and embarrasses you about the various elements of your life. The thing that was funniest for me is this idea that I went to Princeton and Harvard. It means I have a lot of debt, okay? So when I sometimes sit when I'm in the UK and people tell me about their educational debt, and I say $9,000 a year, I wish. What is it? It's now for an undergraduate degree in the United States at some universities, it's $60,000 a year in just tuition. That's just tuition, and then graduate school. So I think of it, however, as being a good and useful investment. So let me not minimize and trivialize that. I wanted to thank everybody who's brought me here today, particularly to Dr. Brown. Thank you for putting this event together. It's so important. It really is critical that groups get together, and this group get together. And as I look around, and I'm going to look at you all very, very closely and specifically, because I want to remember this. I don't often get to sit in these kinds of rooms in front of this level of person talking about these sorts of issues. And so when I get an opportunity to see you all and see those hopefully receptive faces looking back at me and supportive faces looking back at me, I always take a minute to take a beat and sort of breathe in all of that fantastic energy, to get all of that strength that's come from all the struggles that we've all been through in terms of our businesses, to think about all of the persistence and perseverance that is actually in this room, and to take something from that, and not to take it for granted, but to say, what can I actually add to these people who have been through it all? is there anything that I could actually say to you that will actually make a difference and help to make sure that you can progress your businesses and by extension, quite frankly, I think advance Black Britain? That's why I'm here, talking to some business people because I believe that you are the answer to a number of questions. And now I'm looking at you in an accusatory fashion, all right? Because I want you to actually step up to the task of solving the problems of Black Britain. And I'm going to say this in a particular fashion by giving you some data points. Do you know, and hopefully you probably read the Guardian article about this, that 1 in 2 Black children in the UK are living in poverty? That's every person in here. If you turn to the person next to you, if you were a child here in the UK, one of you is living below the poverty line. Your white colleagues, that's 1 in 5. That is staggering, unacceptable, but it's not something I want us to work on in the future. It's something that needs to change today and immediately. And I believe that business is the way for that to happen, all right? That's one fact. Do you know that the average Black business in the UK, if we look at the median Black business in the UK, so that means half are above and half are below this number, but the median income or turnover for those companies is £25,000 a year, which is basically a starting salary for someone out of university. That's how much money we produce as a Black business. Most of us are sole traders. And I say us because I started ImpactX with some colleagues, and so I run a Black business. If you've looked at our website, you'll know. Wait a second, let me show you something. If you look at our website, I have a picture from it. Oh, I like that. Okay, I'm not so good at this, as you can tell. Back. Okay, well, a lot of pictures of me. All right, well, I usually have, you saw that picture of my team, right? Which looks like it's from a Marvel sort of advertisement. That's the team. We did that purposely. But that is the group that is actually investing. And we, as Black companies, we don't turn over very much capital, and we don't tend to hire other people. If we do hire some other people, we hire our family members. But the vast majority of us don't even do that because we just don't produce enough turnover in order to be able to do that. My point is not that that's a bad thing. It's a great thing that we have these businesses. It's just what do we need to do in order to scale them up to something that is actually going to be the solution to the problems that I think that we have. Let me talk about a few other problems that I think are consequential for us. Do you know that 2 in 3 of us don't own our own homes in the UK? So we are, as Black people, we are not homeowners. And we know home ownership in the UK and generally in most developed countries around the world is one of the primary sources of wealth. And that we know that wealth is the thing. I was actually in a session before about IP, and IP is an asset and how that asset can be leveraged in order to do different things. Likewise, home ownership is an asset, and assets can be used to do different things, such as to borrow against that home in order to help fund your business. Without home ownership, we actually lack a lot of the collateral which is necessary in order to be able to progress our businesses and to be able to invest in ourselves, which then creates another dynamic. And what is that dynamic? The dynamic is that we have to often go hat in hand to organizations to ask for support. We have to go hat in hand to go to places that generally deny us support, right? So if we know about lending rates in the UK, which are supposed to be very objective, the standards for lending are supposed to be extremely objective, that you have to reach a certain sort of a threshold in terms of income, certain asset, and then you'll be able to get a loan for whatever it is you need, particularly house purchasing. And we know in the UK that 1 in 2 people live in poverty. So we know that they're not going to make the cutoff in terms of income. We know 2 in 3 people don't have any asset called a house, so that there's not going to be collateral to actually allow them to do a number of things. So this objective system which we supposedly all live in, which allows us through, no one is going to be treated unfairly, is unfair in its very beginnings. We have no ability to actually, at this point, rely upon that system to change the world for us. Some of us can. There are those people, there are people who make millions and trillions, trillions, that's impossible, but billions of dollars, billions of pounds and pence, but most of us are not in that position. So I would have us to think a little bit about that. I do want to give you one other fact before I move on to talk to you about what I think is actually a solution and why I'm here today. One other fact that I thought was extremely telling. We know that the group of people in the world who are building businesses faster than anyone else are black women. In almost every economy where there are black women, I don't believe there are very many of us in Japan and China, but every place else, here in the UK, black women are actually driving the entrepreneurial boom. When we see things like COVID, when we see things like the staggering inflation that we're seeing right now, we see also that the companies that we're starting, and especially those companies by black women, close at an astronomical rate. Think about what happened right after lockdown in 2020 in the United States. By April of 2020, 40% of black businesses had closed. 40%, that's almost half of black businesses had closed, no matter what age they were. And that's within a month. Has to do with cash flow, has to do with a lot of things, and it also has to do with the kind of businesses that we were actually in, ones that were actually closed down and shuttered because they gave personal services. In any case, anyone in business today, from the smallest mom and pop takeaway to the biggest multinational company, knows that we're functioning in unprecedented times. And the title of what I want to talk to you about is, so given that we're in unprecedented times, will today be the day that we stop asking for permission? Okay? Will today be the day that we as black entrepreneurs stop asking for permission? Will today be the day that you and you and you and you stop asking for permission? And I think it's an absolutely critical question to ask, and a critical question for us to answer individually and collectively. Because I do believe that it has been this continual requirement of permission. We want to be accepted. We want to be in the same clubs. We want to be highly regarded. None of those things are terrible, you all. I'm not criticizing those things as being terrible and absolutely pathologic. That's not what I'm saying. However, I'm saying the over-reliance on those sorts of things also means that we are putting our destinies into the hands of other people. Unless you are a person, and maybe there are people here who actually believe this, that believe that misogyny does no longer exist, that there's no, well, sometimes I think about the Race Relations Report, sometimes I think about the current government. They actually believe that racism doesn't exist, that they believe that, women, the misogyny against women doesn't exist. But in the world in which Eric exists, those things still are very, very tangible, intangibly evidenced in what I see on a day-to-day basis. Unless you believe that, by asking permission from the powers that be and putting your destiny in their hands, you actually are playing a very losing game. Correct? Yes. And so why do we do it? Right? Why do we spend time and time again trying to get people to believe what we believe is important, and then getting to back us? And getting untold influence over how that backing is actually provided. What I'm going to be talking to you about today is the idea of for us and by us. And let me tell you why I think this is necessary in 2022. Because goodness knows, when I saw Barack Obama elected in 2008, I thought the world had changed. I really did. I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. You should have seen the people that poured into Washington, D.C. I remember going to the train station to pick up a friend from Boston. She'd come down, her mother was flying in from Chicago, they were going to stay with us. And I remember at that train station, and it was like I had gone to homecoming. Because there were all of these people there, and there was such celebration and jubilation and such a good feeling throughout. And I stayed in D.C. actually until 2014 when I first moved to the United Kingdom. And I still felt that same sense of fantastic. But then I started to see Donald Trump, right? And it became suddenly very clear to me that the world in which I was living and the one that I had hoped to create and the one that I had spent so much time, and my parents had spent so much time, and my grandparents had spent so much time trying to create and foment, was a little bit at risk, and that I was going to have to decide how I was going to deal with that. Many people said, well, Eric, you jumped shores. You came to the UK, so you kind of missed the Trump years. but I still got the Boris Johnson years. So I got some years, all right? So, I would say, let me, I'm going to try not to get into political today, okay? I'm going to try. All right, I'll go back to script. In any case, let's just say I have been on both sides of the Atlantic, and we have not reached the promised land yet anywhere. That's a good ending for that. Let's just leave that there. All right. So anyone in business today, I'm going to go back to this point, anyone in business today, from the smallest mom and pop takeaway to the biggest multinational tech company, knows that we are functioning in unprecedented times. And to this audience, it's not a secret that even in the best of times, and we just exited one of the longest periods of sustained macroeconomic growth that the world has ever seen, Black businesses in the UK almost always function under tough conditions. We face all of the usual business challenges, plus some unique headwinds resulting from doing business while being Black. In the US, we have this expression, driving while Black. You know how dangerous it is in the United States if the police pull you over and you end up your family being told later how you were killed because you tried to do something aggressive, right? That it's always that, and then suddenly video comes forward that says that it was something completely different. But we call that driving while Black. Here in the UK, I call it business while Black, because it means that we have less capital to begin with, and we keep on running into the very limiting prejudices about what Black businesses can be, should be, and will be. And I'm going to give you an example. Remember the government's response to COVID, and it was actually very, very laudable. Remember the bounce back loan scheme? Do you remember that? It was saving so many UK businesses, all thanks to taxpayer funding. And all of you are taxpayers, right? So, UK Black businesses were not receiving loans anywhere near the numbers their economic contributions would suggest. It was absolutely, I'm going to use the term again, staggering that the amount of money that we put into the economy and the businesses that you run generate for the economy, and we could not get loans even from some of our own banks. The amount of denial was phenomenal. And so this is an example of why I think we have to do some things for ourselves. Again, it was an objective system, correct? You were told time and time again that all you had to do was apply and everyone had the same opportunity to get capital. And yet, after the fact, we see that the numbers say that that's actually not the case. And suddenly we hear, well, cronyism and other sorts of things help people to get contracts and other sorts of things and actually get money. So we actually know that that was not true. But at the time, that's some of the food in which we were being fed. But most of us survived, and some of us even thrived during this period. London's own Darren Tenkorang comes to mind. You may remember Trimit from episode 4. You saw some pictures up there of the program I hosted on Channel 4. Darren started that company well before COVID. And it's a tech company that uses a sophisticated app to recruit and deploy mobile barbers around London. But when COVID hit, remember? COVID hits and you're not able to trade if you were sort of touching people. And if you're sort of a beautician, you're a barber, you're a stylist, those things were no longer possible. And so suddenly, it looked like a perfect storm to destroy the business. But I decided to invest in Trimit, and instead of just waiting until the storm passed, we doubled down on their franchise model. And the rest is becoming history as the number of barbers who are now working with Trimit in terms of the number of vans that are actually out on the roads, gone from 8 during the time that the show was being filmed to 70 today. So that's the kind of opportunity that some people get. That is true. I mean, and Trimit, that's the kind of opportunity that some organizations are able to take during an economic downturn. Trimit, in that way, feels a bit like Uber and Airbnb. Airbnb and Uber both started during the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. So another time when credit was hard to come by, businesses were closing down and shuttering. Remember how difficult that time was. The housing market was horrifying, but some companies actually started. Some companies then actually used those dynamics in order to become the behemoths they are today, particularly Airbnb. Uber, any of you who try to get here today by Uber understand they're struggling a bit. But Airbnb is doing very, very well, and in fact is becoming more and more valuable by the day. Now, I want to give you a little bit of a secret. In order to build the next Uber or Airbnb, entrepreneurs have to be tenacious and creative. And if you don't take anything else from this presentation, this is what I would take from the presentation. My investment secret is to focus on Black entrepreneurs and especially women. So, because what group is more creative than the group that actually started Motown, grime and drill, who's more tenacious than the folks who have survived colony, empire, and even Commonwealth? So when you're investing as a venture capitalist, you're looking for people who are going to be able to take all the economic, buffeting of the winds and all the terrible things that are going to happen and the twists and turns, and are going to be able to not only sort of think through the present, but then plan for a future and find ways to drive through that effectively. And this is what you find when you invest in Black entrepreneurs, particularly. And I would say to all of you, particularly when you invest in Black women. All right? And I want you to think about that. I want you to think to yourself and think in your heart, do I really believe that if I want to return extraordinarily, do I invest in Black women? Because ImpactX thinks that that is the missing piece. That the women that we could actually harness, the creativity and the tenacity that we could harness, could create all of the change that we're looking for. So there are some proof points that exist here in the UK and around the world. Do you all know Calendly? And you know Calendly's a Black company, right? Right, everyone knows that. And do you know, so you know Marshmallow? Do you know Marshmallow? So Marshmallow is your very own UK unicorn. It's a Black unicorn. So if you don't know this, you should know Calendly, because it was started by twin founders, Oliver and Alexander Kent Barnums. And there are many things to like about Marshmallow. The thing I always liked best is that they had huge dreams and aspirations. They were trying to solve the problem of how unfair insurance premiums that plague young people and expats in the UK can actually be solved. And they use AI, artificial intelligence, to help them get competitively priced products, then expand. And they had the aspiration not to just have that to happen here in London, but to have that expand around the country. The region being the UK and Europe, and then the world, because they believe that the next place that they're going to go is the United States. For me, when a company starts with that sort of an aspirational level, that's when we know that we have something interesting. And when we have that sort of an aspirational level, that they are going to take on organizations the size of Airbnb, then we actually know that we can solve bigger problems, like the problem of poverty among young people here in the UK, the problem of health disparities between Blacks and whites here in the UK, the problems of educational attainment that exist between the various groups here in the UK. We're able to do those things. And the reason that we're able to do that is because we are going to be starting businesses and growing businesses that have never been seen. There has never been a Black business on the FTSE 100, right? There has never been a Black business in the Fortune 500, never. These are the businesses, if you think about it, think about Uber. We were talking about Uber a few years ago because there was a question as to, was Uber a company that had employees that were really gig economy employees or full-time employees? The government of the UK, the city of London, spent a huge amount of time with the founder of that company and then the people who are running that company trying to figure out how do we change the actual relationship between employees and employers. They were actually making policy based on that company alone. That is a kind of power we've never had. There has never been a Black woman from Bristol who has been having that kind of conversation with the government. And not just the government in the UK, but the government in France, the government in the United States, the government in China. Having that conversation everywhere and helping to influence outcomes. As long as we have small companies, we can only focus on small initiatives. If we can get some big companies, Calendly gets to be the size of Amazon. Marshmallow gets to be the size of Microsoft. Then we have the opportunity to really be involved and determine some various things. Another thing that we get to determine is who gets hired into which roles. I am so tired of D&I. Let me tell you, seriously, and I'm telling you why I'm tired of D&I. DEI, D&I, all of the different diversity training. The reason I'm tired is because we're trying to retrofit organizations that are broken. If you were started wrong, you just grow wrong, right? It's not as though something happens differently. You're just wrong. So when we have a Black woman or a Black man who starts an organization who thinks very differently, generally, I again have to think about the Tory government, but let's pretend, who thinks differently about who is worthwhile to be in which seats, Who actually can run a sales organization? Who should be on the board of directors? Who should be in the C-suite? Who is actually a real engineer? Those are the sorts of decisions that are made very differently by a black woman who comes out of Birmingham than someone who comes out of Silicon Valley and went to Stanford and went to Eton first and then went to Stanford. Those people think very differently about who's smart, who's capable, and who's able, correct? So if you want to come up with different solutions to these sorts of problems, you better come up with different people starting the company in the first place and backing companies that make sense and are going to back you. So in my opinion, and the reason that I wrote the book, We Don't Need Permission, is because I actually do think we need a manifesto. We need a manifesto that lays out how we can build businesses of scale, how we get these organizations from being just the mom and pop takeout shop to actually making them the next Google, making them the next Meta, making them the next whatever. Name a big company, one of the FANG companies, making them the next Netflix. And when we do that, we will have the opportunity to participate, and not just participate, but to lead the kinds of conversations we want. And not only will we create just one, what is the guy's name from Tesla? Elon Musk. But you will create, okay. This time I'm just naming it. That was messy, I know, that was messy. That was messy, I get it. Okay, so let's pretend I'm not being shady today, but I'm gonna go a little bit further. But it's not that we invent the same thing as Elon Musk, but we invent someone who has that same sort of influences. I've been reading the New York Times, and I've been reading The Guardian and I've been reading the Financial Times over the past few months. The number of times that man is mentioned and gets to lead the conversation about everything. And you're just like, and with Twitter has actually, the kinds of things that have then happened to Twitter because he makes a decision about what he wants to do with this particular organization. And we watch in rapt attention to it, right? Every day we watch the comings and goings, the toings and froings. It's like I'm watching the Kardashians. But it is a fascinating opportunity to actually be in the middle of the conversation. We have got to get to the point that we are creating organizations like that. ImpactX believes that is exactly what we are doing. We are creating organizations that will have that sort of scale and will have that sort of scope. We'd love your help in doing that. We want you to come to us. We want you to tell us, this is the business we're growing, but we want you to come and tell us that this is the business you're growing, not because you want to drive a Bentley, but because you actually want to control the discourse. You want to buy Snapchat at some future point. If you tell me that, you got me at, I want to buy Snapchat. Right? Now, you better come up with an idea for it, and it better look good, but we do want to talk with you because we understand that you have the aspiration. We don't need to infuse the aspiration in you. You actually have the aspiration, and we're going to have to hang on for dear life to keep up with you, and we're happy to take that sort of a position. The other thing that makes us want to rely upon business is you did not know, let me ask the question. Are any of you over 30 years old in here? Yes, okay. Are any of you over 40 years old? Okay, good. We're getting there. I will not go any further because I'll be, But one of the things that I would say is that when we who are a bit over 40 started out life, there was no such organization as Amazon. There was no such organization as, Microsoft, if we were 40, there was a Microsoft. There was not really an organization called Apple. Those organizations are ones that have come within a generation or two and changed the world. This can happen with large-scale business, you all. Large-scale businesses help us to change the world in a generation. Airbnb has sort of disrupted how we think about Hilton, how we think about Premier, how we think about IBIS. It helps us to rethink all that. When we go to a place, we no longer think we have to check into a hotel. We can do something else. The idea of car sharing. Uber is a car sharing opportunity. Thinking about, do I need to own a car anymore in the middle of London if I don't want to take public transportation all the time? No, you can actually sit in the back of a car. It changes the way that we relate to the world around us. That's what we can do if we're building large-scale businesses. We can actually change the center of gravity. All right? And that is what we're trying to do. So one of the things that I want to encourage you, and this is the last thing I want to say to you, is that I want to encourage you to think, if I want to make wholesale change, if I don't like the way that the world is right now, and I think that there can be improvements, even small tweaks, I can do that from my position as an entrepreneur. And I should do that with my position as an entrepreneur. I have every ability to do that, and I don't need permission from anyone else. Did Bill Gates ask anyone for permission? Did Kathy Hughes ask anyone for permission? Did Pat McGrath ask anyone for permission? They did not. And those last two are black women. So remember, you do not need permission, and I hope today is the day we stop asking for permission as entrepreneurs here in the UK, and that because you came to this conference, you leave here with the understanding that there are people around, as Zachi, my colleague, and I being some of them, Dr. Brown and his team being some of them, the lawmakers here being some of them who believe and want to make sure that you have the opportunity to change the center of gravity, and you don't need our permission or anyone else's to do that. And we want to be helpful and supportive. All right? So that's it for me. Thank you so much, you all, for listening. It's great seeing you.
Okay, Collins, thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.